Okay, so are you ready to dive in? Today's going to be a wild ride. We're tackling mathematical biology alongside a philosophical take on depression. Talk about a brain workout.
An intriguing pairing of subjects, for sure. At their core, both touch on the idea of systems, be it a bustling ecosystem or the intricacies of our minds.
You hit the nail on the head. Speaking of systems, I've got to ask you about this phrase from the textbook, shark tuna space. Now, I don't know about you, but it conjures up some pretty intense Jaws imagery in my head.
I can see why. But shark tuna space isn't some hidden ocean trench. It refers to something called state space, which is more of a conceptual map.
Okay, so instead of islands and currents, we're mapping out.
Instead of those, picture charting different population sizes of sharks and tuna. Every point on this map represents a snapshot, the specific moment in their population dynamics.
So it's like swapping out latitude and longitude for shark counts and tuna numbers. It's visualizing a population census in action. I like it.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool that lets us see how these populations might interact and change without getting lost in the nitty-gritty of tracking every single fish.
We're talking big picture stuff here, but how do we actually map out these changes?
With equations, of course. What else?
Equations, the trusty sidekick of scientists everywhere.
The textbook starts with a simple example. Imagine a single population represented by the variable x. Now, the equation governing its change is x equals rx.
Hold on, break that down for me. What's x?
X represents the rate at which the population changes.
Gotcha. So if x is positive, the population is increasing, and if it's negative, things are headed south, right?
Right on. And R. Well, that's the population's growth rate. Positive R. More births than deaths. Things are booming. Negative R. The opposite.
Like a tug of war between growth and decline.
A perfect analogy. But here's where it gets really interesting. The textbook then dives into this whole thing about HIV and how early mathematical models, while seemingly on the right track, completely missed the mark when it came to predicting the onset of AIDS.
That's a bit concerning, isn't it? You'd think math would be a slam dunk in these situations.
Well, it's crucial to remember that we're talking about models. They're simplified versions of reality. And in the case of those early HIV models, while they factored in the virus's impact on certain immune cells, they overlooked a whole slew of other things that contribute to the progression of AIDS.
So it's like trying to grasp a symphony by only listening to the violins. You might catch a melody or two, but you're missing a huge chunk of the full composition.
Precisely. And that's what's so cool about this. The model's failure wasn't a dead end. If anything, it highlighted the gaps in our knowledge.
A failed model paving the way for new discoveries. It's a good reminder that science is full of surprises. But these models, they're not just limited to single populations like in our HIV example, are they?
Not at all. This whole approach, simplifying, visualizing, testing it, can be applied to systems way more complex, with tons of moving parts. Think ecosystems, for example, with their intricate webs of predators and prey.
Now we're talking. This is where things start to feel like one of those epic nature documentaries, the kind I can really get behind. Bring on the sharks and tuna.
You're spot on to bring up sharks and tuna. They're like a textbook example of feedback loops in nature. One population's upswing triggers a downturn in the other, and around it goes. And, these feedback mechanisms, they're everywhere. Not just in the vast ocean, but right inside us, too.
Hold up, feedback loops inside us. Paint me a picture here. Are we talking like an internal messaging system going haywire?
Haywire might be a bit strong. It's more like a well-rehearsed orchestra, everything working together. Think about our stress response system. Stressful situation pops up, your brain's like the conductor yelling, go. Hormones like cortisol flood in.
So our body is basically hitting the fight or flight button.
Exactly. And here's the feedback part. As things calm down, those stress hormones, they're still circulating, right? Eventually, they signal back to the brain, all right, we can ease up now.
It's like our body's constantly walking this tightrope, responding to changes, recalibrating, all to stay balanced. Pretty wild when you think about it, though I'm guessing it doesn't always go perfectly to plan.
You're right. Sometimes things go off the rails. The textbook brought up this example of the spruce budworm tiny insects, but they can decimate entire forests. And what's fascinating is how their population can go totally out of whack with even the tiniest change. Like even just a small shift in their growth rate can have huge consequences.
So we've gone from sharks and tuna to our inner stress response to tree-munching insects. I've got to hand it to you. You've got a knack for connecting the dots in some pretty unexpected ways.
That's the beauty of it, wouldn't you say? These things that seem totally unrelated, populations fluctuating, hormones doing their thing, even forests being eaten up.
Yeah.
They all come back to this idea of systems, of how interconnected everything is, and how even tiny tweaks can have these ripple effects, sometimes with massive consequences.
Okay, I'm starting to get the bigger picture. We've got these systems always trying to find balance, but at the same time, they're vulnerable, easily tipped into a whole other state by the smallest things. Kind of awe-inspiring, but also a bit unnerving, though.
Indeed. And this whole instability thing, this idea of systems abruptly shifting gears, it becomes super relevant as we move to our next topic, the experience of depression in our modern world.
Showtime. We're finally making the jump from the wild world out there to the even wilder one inside our heads.
And this philosophical text you shared, it frames depression not just as a personal struggle, but as a social symptom, like a reflection of the times we live in.
Wait, so we're saying that how society's structured could actually be pushing people towards depression. Now, that's a sobering thought. How does that connect with everything we've been discussing?
We'll think back to our stress response system.
Mm.
Our bodies are always aiming for balance, right? But what happens when the world outside is constantly bombarding us with demands and expectations, never giving us a break?
It's like our internal systems are trying to find solid ground that just doesn't exist. No wonder people feel so on edge all the time. It's like our internal systems are trying to find solid ground that just doesn't exist. No wonder people feel so on edge all the time.
Exactly. And this text argues that this constant pressure, this relentless pace we've come to expect, it can even warp our sense of time. It's like we're trapped in this endless now, consumed by whatever's demanding our attention right now,
Right.
always chasing the next thing without really, enjoying the journey.
Stuck on a hamster wheel, putting in all the effort but going nowhere. It's easy to see how that could lead to feeling empty.
Yes, and the text suggests that this messed up relationship we have with time, it can spill over into how we see ourselves. Like there's this disconnect between who we are deep down our being
Right.
and all these demands of what we're supposed to be doing, achieving, having.
It's the classic being versus having dilemma, but cranked up to 11, thanks to, well, modern life. Everywhere you look, there's a message telling you what you're missing, what you need to buy, what you need to do to be considered successful. It's exhausting.
And it can be incredibly destabilizing, especially for anyone already struggling with, feeling secure in themselves. Remember those unstable systems we talked about? How easy it is for them to tip over into a whole other state.
Oh yeah, like that hair trigger feeling where the smallest thing can send you spiraling.
Well, the text suggests that depression, in a way, can be like that too. It's a stable state in a sense, but a painful one. It's like this pattern of thinking and feeling that's really hard to break free from.
Like getting stuck in a rut, a negative feedback loop, feelings of hopelessness and self-doubt just feeding into themselves. It's a vicious cycle.
Exactly. And one way out, according to the text, is to reclaim our imaginary. That ability to be creative, to dream, to envision different possibilities for ourselves.
Wait a minute, I'm a bit confused. Didn't the text earlier say that fantasy was a way for people to avoid their problems? And now it's being presented as a solution.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. For some, fantasy can be a way to check out of reality, to dodge those tough emotions. But when you're talking about depression, the problem is often the opposite. It's a lack of imagination, this shrinking of what's possible. People get so focused on what's wrong right now, on the figure of their distress, that they lose sight of the bigger picture, the ground, all the relationships, values, experiences that make their life meaningful.
That's where that M.C. Escher artwork comes in, right? The one with all those interlocking creatures.
Exactly. It perfectly captures this figure and ground idea. Just like your eyes can see different things in those images, our minds can get locked onto one specific way of seeing ourselves and our lives. And often it's a negative one. The key is regaining that flexibility, that ability to shift perspectives, to remember that there's always more to the story than what we're fixated on.
So how do we do that? How do we break free from those negative thought patterns and tap back into our imaginary? It sounds like a tall order.
It's a journey, no doubt. There's no magic bullet.
Right.
But the text suggests that introspection is key, really taking a look at the underlying patterns in our lives, those givens we never question.
Like, what are the critical parameters in the equation of our lives?
Exactly. Our relationships, values, beliefs, those are the variables to examine. And just like with those mathematical models, maybe by tweaking these key things, we can set positive changes in motion. It's about creating an internal environment that's more supportive, more nourishing.
It's not just about thinking differently, it's about living differently too. That's a powerful takeaway.
It is, and it all circles back to that interconnectedness we've been talking about. Remember the butterfly effect. that even the tiniest change can have huge consequences down the line. Well, the same applies to our own lives. The way we connect with others, spend our time, even the stories we tell ourselves, all of it can have a ripple effect, shifting us towards a better place.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. We started with sharks and tuna, explored the inner workings of our bodies, and ended up contemplating the very nature of self and society. I think this might take the cake for the most unexpected connection between math, biology, and philosophy.
You never know where those threads of knowledge will lead. That's what makes it so exciting.
Couldn't agree more. And to our listeners, we leave you with this. Think about the state space of your own lives. What forces are shaping your experiences? Where do you feel those pushes and pulls? And most importantly, where are the opportunities for growth, for change, for creating a life that truly reflects who you are? It's a journey worth taking, and we hope this deep dive has given you some new maps and tools to help you along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep diving deep.